Hello, and welcome back. I've finished reviewing the Book of Mormon now. If you go to the channel page, you can find my review of each chapter, and now I've got time to cover a few additional topics. Today we will be discussing Alma the Younger, and you may think that you know him, but you probably don't appreciate how incredible he actually was. It's easy to think of prophets and high priests as old, slow-moving, and sometimes, if I dare say it, boring. But to use a term from the movie Braveheart, he was also a warrior poet. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We first meet Alma in Mosiah 27. And since his father was also named Alma, today's protagonist is usually referred to as Alma the Younger. Our first meeting with Alma the Younger is at an interesting time in Nephite history, at a time of unrest in the church. And I want to spend a few minutes giving the setting here because it has a lot of important consequences. A lot of young people did not believe their parents' tradition that Christ would come. And it says they could not understand the Word of God and their hearts were hardened. There have always been unbelievers, but what made this situation different was that the unbelievers were actively trying to win over the believers. And Mosiah 26:6 says that they did deceive many with their flattering words who were in the church, and did cause them to commit many sins. A lot of people were sinning. It doesn't say exactly what their sins were, but some of the sinners belonged to the church, and some of them didn't. Those who belonged to the church were subject to the law of Moses, which had various punishments assigned to it. And verse 6 tells us the people committing sins who belonged to the church needed to be dealt with by the church. Those who did not belong to the church apparently got a free pass. And the narrator tells us in the next chapter that the king's sons were numbered among those unbelievers. And so was one of the sons of the high priest. And that son was Alma the Younger, the person this video is about. And Alma's father was in a bind. He was the high priest, so he was responsible for enforcing the law of Moses. Under the law of Moses, if we go to Deuteronomy 13, verses 6 through 10, people who encouraged others to leave the faith were supposed to be put to death by stoning. And both Alma and the king had sons who were guilty of this, so it was a rather serious problem. It doesn't discuss that explicitly, but depending on how literally they followed the law of Moses, Alma might have been required to stone the sons of King Mosiah and also his own son. So Alma was deeply troubled by how to handle all of this, and it talks about that in Alma 26. When he went to God and prayed, God gave him another option, excommunication. This would allow people to leave the church if they wished, something they apparently couldn't do before, which may have been why there were so many Nephite dissenters living among the Lamanites. So as counterintuitive as it may seem, the introduction of excommunication was a huge blessing, both to those who had chosen not to believe and also to Alma, who was responsible for punishing them. Anyway, the way this ties into our story is that once people had the ability to leave the church, there was a lot of backlash. People could now legally leave the church and then try to get others to leave, or insult them, or tear them down, or whatever. You're probably familiar with the pattern. Mosiah 27:1 says that the persecutions which were inflicted on the church by the unbelievers became so great that the church began to murmur and to complain to their leaders concerning the matter. And they did complain to Alma, and Alma laid the case before the king. So King Mosiah passed a strict law saying that unbelievers weren't allowed to persecute believers. And then in the next verse, a command was sent to all the churches saying that there shouldn't be any persecution among them either. And it's in this environment that the focus turns to Alma the Younger. Here's what it says. Now the sons of Mosiah were numbered among the unbelievers. And also one of the sons of Alma was numbered among them, he being called Alma after his father. Nevertheless, he became a very wicked and an idolatrous man, and he was a man of many words, and did speak much flattery to the people. Therefore he led many of the people to do after the manner of his iniquities. Alma was apparently a pretty persuasive guy, and we'll come back to that. But let's continue. And he became a great hindrance to the prosperity of the church of God, stealing away the hearts of the people, causing much dissension among the people. giving a chance for the enemy of God to exercise his power over them. And now it came to pass that while he was going about to destroy the church of God, for he did go about secretly with the sons of Mosiah, seeking to destroy the church and to lead astray the people of the Lord, contrary to the commandments of God or even the king. I've wondered how someone can go about secretly leading people astray. First of all, it couldn't have been too secret because his father knew about it. Also, it says that he was causing dissension or disagreement among the church. As the son of the high priest, that might have been easy to do, especially if he was in line to become the next high priest and the people knew about it. But Alma's conversion is not my focus today, but to oversimplify, he was rebuked by an angel, stopped trying to destroy the church, and began making amends. But how old was he when all this happened? With Alma the Younger, we don't have an exact age, only several hints. But unfortunately, not all the hints point in the same direction. But here's some of the information that we have about his age. First, we know how old his father was. Alma 29, verses 45 and 46 tell us that Alma's father died at the age of 82 in 91 BC, 509 years after Lehi left Jerusalem. So there's no mystery about his father's age. Alma's encounter with the angel was sometime between 100 BC and 92 BC, meaning his father would have been somewhere between 73 and 81 years old when Alma was converted. Now, although the exact date is imprecise, I suspect that Alma's conversion happened toward the latter end of that range when his father was closer to 81. And the reason I think this is because Mosiah's sons, who were with Alma when the encounter with the angel happened, went on their missions to the Lamanites in about 91 BC at the end of that time range. And it's hard to picture them waiting 7 or 8 years after being visited by the angel before starting their missions. So, if your dad is over 80, you're probably not a teenager. It's more likely that you're middle-aged, but verse 8 of chapter 27 says that he was one of the sons of Alma, so maybe he was the baby of the family. It doesn't say. So it's mathematically possible that Alma was already in his late 50s when he encountered the angel. But if he was the youngest, he might have been as young as in his 30s, but either way, he was not a kid. Another hint that implies that Alma is younger rather than a 40 or 50-something is that when the angel was rebuking him in Mosiah 27, he said, "Now I say unto thee, go and remember the captivity of thy fathers in the land of Helam." In Alma 29, verses 11 and 12, Alma also talks about the Lord delivering his fathers from captivity with no mention of himself being delivered from captivity. As a quick reminder, the land of Helam is where Alma, the father, and his followers were enslaved by the Lamanites and King Noah's priests before they escaped and came to Zarahemla. They escaped around 121 BC, which was between 21 and 29 years before the angel rebuked them. If Alma were a 50-year-old man when the angel appeared, he would have been in his 20s while they lived in Helam, and the angel probably would not have said to remember his father's captivity. He would have said, remember your own captivity. So that implies that Alma the Younger was probably born when his father was older. One last hint that we have is that later in 74 BC, around 18 years after the encounter with the angel, if we assume that the sons of Mosiah didn't wait a long time to go on their missions, Alma speaks to the youngest of his 3 sons, Corianton, who has become involved with a harlot, which tells us that 18 years later, Alma's youngest son was done with puberty. His father tells him, "Thou art in thy youth." But he also said the same thing to Corianton's oldest brother Helaman at the same time in Alma 36. So we know that they're young, but we don't know how young. Anyway, what that implies is that 18 years earlier, when the sons of Mosiah left on their missions, Alma probably had a few children already, which may explain why he stayed behind when his friends went on missions to preach to the Lamanites rather than joining them. So, in my opinion, based on all the clues, I would probably guess that Alma was not 40 or 50 when the angel appeared, but probably in his late 20s or maybe early 30s, which would have made his father about 50 years older than he was. And that's just my opinion. Did I miss any hints? Let me know what you think in the comments. Okay, enough about his age. What made him so amazing? Well, at about the same time that the sons of Mosiah went on their missions, two things happened. First, Alma Sr. retired as the high priest. He was about to die. And he appointed Alma Jr. to be the next leader of the church. So in less than 10 years, possibly in as little as 1 year, Alma went from being a very wicked man trying to destroy the church to being made the leader of the church. That's the first thing. And you might wonder how the church members would react to this. How would they feel about someone who had been trying to destroy the church being made the next prophet? And that leads us to the second thing. Although he was only 60 years old, King Mosiah seemed to know that he was about to die. In my opinion, he probably had a terminal condition. And Ammon, Aaron, and his other sons had refused to be king and had gone on missions, leaving Mosiah without a successor. So he restructured the government, replacing the monarchy with a democratic system of judges, where judges and important decisions would be decided by popular vote. And the people loved this because, as it says, they were exceedingly anxious that every man should have an equal chance throughout all the land. And wouldn't you know it, Alma, the newly appointed high priest, won that national election. So that kind of answers the question of how the people felt about him. They loved him. Think about that. 1 year, he's described as a very wicked and idolatrous man going around seeking to destroy the church. And a couple years later, not only is he leading the church, but he wins the national election by popular vote. You can see how someone of this caliber trying to destroy the church would be a great hinderment, as the narrator said. Now continuing. Roughly 5 years after Alma was elected, a man named Amlici began to campaign to replace him as the chief judge. The clues indicate that Amlici already had a large following of dissenters living among the Lamanites for a long time. And I talk about this in my video on Alma chapters 1 through 3 if you want to check that out. But now, with the people able to voluntarily leave the church, and also with leadership being decided by popular vote, and everyone having an equal chance, Amlici decided to run for office. Long story short, Amlici lost the election, but his followers didn't care. They left town, crowned Amlici king, armed themselves, and invaded the Nephites. You might think that losing a popular vote would make Amlici realize that numbers weren't on his side. But, as I said earlier, Amlici had been active among the Lamanites for a long time and had coordinated an attack with them. So the Nephites weren't simply fighting against the Amlicites, who they outnumbered. A day after the Amlicites attacked, they were joined by a Lamanite army described as being as numerous as the sands of the sea. And wars were fought differently then. The rulers and leaders didn't send their troops to war, they led them into battle. So in Alma chapter 2, we find Alma fighting with Amlici on the banks of the river Sidon. Here's what it says. And it came to pass that Alma fought with Amlici with the sword face to face, and they did contend mightily one with another. And it came to pass that Alma, being a man of God, being exercised with much faith, cried, saying, O Lord, have mercy and spare my life, that I may be an instrument in thy hands to save and preserve this people. And now when Alma had said these words, he contended with Amlici. And he was strengthened insomuch that he slew Amlici with the sword. And after he defeated Amlici, Alma went after the Lamanite king next. But the Lamanite king fled and sent his guards to fight against Alma. Alma and his guards beat the Lamanite guards and drove them back. Not much later, the Nephite army defeated the Lamanite army and sent them back to their own lands. So in addition to being the church's high priest and popular enough to win a national election twice, Alma was also a warrior. And he was also a good ruler. And under his leadership, the people prospered, but they prospered a little too much and became proud and materialistic and selfish. So Alma resigned as chief judge and put all his efforts into being the high priest, and he attempted to bring his people back to righteousness. And you know how we talked about Alma being popular and persuasive? Well, now we get to see it. Alma 5, where he preaches to the people of Zarahemla, is one of the most powerful chapters in the Book of Mormon. Don't believe me? Read it. And that's just one of them. His sermons to his people as he traveled through the land, converting them, are some of the best, most powerful testimonies of Jesus Christ in all the scriptures. Others in the Book of Mormon include Alma 11 through 13, Alma 31 through 34, Alma 36 through 42, and Alma 45. Let me know if I missed any. And his preaching had more of an impact than you may have realized. Here's what I mean. You're probably familiar with the missionary efforts of Ammon, Aaron, and the other sons of Mosiah. As a result of their efforts, tens of thousands of Lamanites became converted, and they were so converted that they made an oath to never take up weapons again. And we see in Alma 24 that they would rather die than break their oath. And we often think these people, called the people of anti-Nephi-Lehi, are examples of what true conversion should look like. But let's also look at what happens in Alma 28. The Nephite dissenters and unconverted Lamanites had gathered an army and were preparing to slaughter the converted people of anti-Nephi-Lehi. So the people of anti-Nephi-Lehi fled north to where the Lamanites lived and asked whether the Nephites would be willing to help them out. The Nephites, though, were a democracy now, and they voted on what to do with the Lamanite converts. They voted on whether they'd be willing to give them a place to live, and also whether they would be willing to defend them against the Lamanite army. And here's what we find in Alma 27. And it came to pass that the voice of the people came, saying, Behold, we will give up the land of Jershon, which is on the east by the sea, which joins the land Bountiful, which is on the south of the land Bountiful. And this land Jershon is the land which we will give unto our brethren for an inheritance. And behold, we will set our armies between the land Jershon and the land of Nephi, that we may protect our brethren in the land of Jershon. And this we do for our brethren on account of their fear to take up arms against their brethren, lest they should commit sin. And this their great fear came because of their sore repentance, which they had on account of their many murders and their awful wickedness. And that's what happened. In Alma 28, it says that the anti-Nephi-Lehites settled in Jershon, and then the Lamanite army attacked. Here's verses 2 and 3. And thus there was a tremendous battle, yea, even such an one as never had been known among all the people in the land from the time Lehi left Jerusalem. Yea, and tens of thousands of the Lamanites were slain and scattered abroad. Yea, and also there was a tremendous slaughter among the people of Nephi. Nevertheless, the Lamanites were driven and scattered, and the people of Nephi returned again to their land. And the narrator spends the next several verses describing the mourning of the Nephites. Widows mourning for their husbands, parents mourning the loss of their sons, and children mourning the loss of their fathers. So let me ask you this, who was more converted? Lamanites, who were willing to die rather than break the oath that they had made, or the Nephites, who were willing to die defending the oath that someone else, the Lamanites, had made? Think about that. In 10 years, thanks to Alma's preaching, his people went from being proud and vain and selfish with their hearts set on riches to being willing to die to protect a group of people who had historically murdered them and been their enemies. That's not a small change. Ammon and Aaron's efforts among the Lamanites were remarkable, but if it were not for Alma's efforts among his own people, making them selfless enough to defend their enemies, that story would have had a much sadder ending. So, Alma was a high priest, a warrior, an incredibly effective missionary among his own people. And then in Alma 36 through 42, we find that he was also a good father. And in addition, we have Alma chapter 36, where Alma writes a lengthy poem using a Hebrew form of poetry called a chiasmus to tell his son Helaman about his conversion and his encounter with the angel. So he wrote poetry too. And that's why back at the beginning I referred to Alma, using the Braveheart term, as a warrior poet. And Alma's story ends in a way befitting a high priest, warrior, father, poet, and missionary. Alma 45 says that he blessed his sons. Then he blessed the earth for the righteous' sake. And then he blessed the church and all those who would stand fast in the faith. Verse 18. And when Alma had done this, he departed out of the land of Zarahemla as if to go unto the land of Malek. And it came to pass that he was never heard of more. As to his death or burial, we know not of. Behold, this we know, that he was a righteous man, and the saying went abroad in the church that he was taken up by the Spirit. or buried by the hand of the Lord, even as Moses. But behold, the Scriptures saith the Lord took Moses unto himself, and we suppose that he has also received Alma in the Spirit unto himself. Therefore, for this cause we know nothing concerning his death and burial. In the end, Alma's story is one of hope and redemption, and it's a powerful reminder that no matter where we are in life, we have the opportunity to change and become someone incredible. So as we reflect on Alma, let's be inspired by his courage, his conviction, his unwavering commitment to his faith, and may we strive as he did to live our lives with the spirit of faith, hope, and charity. And that's where we'll leave it. If you enjoyed this, or if you made it this far into the video, click the like button or consider subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments section. And we will see you next time.